The subway platform buzzed with the usual morning rush. Commuters hurried past without a second glance at the figure hunched in the corner near the emergency exit. His weathered hands clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran, anything helps." Most people avoided eye contact, stepping around him like he was part of the station's architecture. Marcus Thompson had been invisible for 3 years now. The same corner, the same routine, the same indifference from the world that rushed past him daily. His gray beard was unkempt, his clothes layered and worn, and his eyes held a distant look that made people uncomfortable. To everyone who saw him, he was just another homeless veteran who had fallen through the cracks. What they didn't know was that Marcus had once commanded respect from thousands of soldiers. He had been General Marcus Thompson, a decorated Marine with 30 years of service, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and a chest full of medals gathering dust in a storage unit he could no longer afford. The transition from commanding troops to begging for change had been swift and brutal. It started with his wife's cancer diagnosis. The medical bills piled up faster than his military pension could cover. When Sarah died, she took his will to fight with her. The house went into foreclosure, his savings disappeared, and pride prevented him from reaching out to old military contacts. Depression wrapped around him like a heavy coat he couldn't remove. The subway platform had become his world. He knew every regular commuter, every transit worker, every sound the trains made. The young businessman who always dropped $1 without looking. The elderly woman who sometimes brought him coffee on cold mornings. The teenagers who occasionally made cruel comments thinking he couldn't hear them. Marcus watched the morning crowd with trained eyes that most assumed were vacant. Years of military service had taught him to observe, to assess threats, to read people's intentions. Even in his current state, those instincts remained sharp. He noticed things others missed. The nervous man checking his watch repeatedly. The woman clutching her purse too tightly. The unusual number of people wearing heavy coats despite the warm weather. The 8:15 train pulled into the station with its familiar screech of brakes. Marcus shifted slightly, knowing this was always the busiest time. Hundreds of people would cram into the cars, heading to offices across the city. He had learned to make himself smaller during these rushes, avoiding the accidental kicks and stepped-on fingers that came with the territory. As the train doors opened, Marcus noticed something that made his military instincts flare. 3 men near the front car moved with purpose that didn't match the casual stride of commuters. Their eyes scanned the crowd methodically, and despite the warm morning, they kept their hands in their jacket pockets. Marcus had seen that look before, in war zones, in hostile territories, in places where danger lurked beneath ordinary surfaces. One of the men made brief eye contact with another across the platform. It was subtle, lasting only a second, but Marcus caught it. These weren't random passengers. They were coordinated, positioned, waiting for something. His heart rate increased as fragments of his military training surfaced through the fog of 3 years' worth of survival mode. The businessman dropped his daily dollar into Marcus's cup, as predictable as clockwork. But Marcus barely noticed. His attention was focused on the 3 men who had now boarded different cars of the train. The doors began to close, and most of the platform cleared as people squeezed aboard or waited for the next train. Marcus struggled to his feet, his joints protesting after hours of sitting on cold concrete. Something was wrong. Every instinct he had developed over 3 decades of military service was screaming warnings. The way the men moved, their positioning, their coordinated timing, it all pointed to something planned, something dangerous. He shuffled closer to the train, pretending to look for dropped change near the tracks. Through the windows, he could see the 3 men in different cars. They were checking their watches, scanning the passengers, waiting. For what? Marcus didn't know, but his gut told him it wasn't good. The elderly woman who sometimes brought him coffee approached with her usual kind smile. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, using the name he had given her months ago. She was one of the few people who treated him like a human being rather than an obstacle. "Morning, Mrs. Chen," he replied, his voice rougher than it had been in his military days. "You shouldn't take this train today." She looked puzzled. "Why not?" "I take it every day to visit my grandson." Marcus glanced at the train, then back at her worried face. How could he explain that 3 years of living on the streets hadn't dulled his ability to spot a military operation? How could he tell her that the homeless man she showed kindness to had once been responsible for the safety of thousands of soldiers? Just trust me, he said quietly. Take the next one. Mrs. Chen studied his face, seeing something there that made her step back from the train doors. She had always sensed there was more to Marcus than met the eye, and something in his tone convinced her to listen. The train pulled away from the station, carrying its cargo of unsuspecting passengers and 3 men with hidden agendas. Marcus watched it disappear into the tunnel, hoping he was wrong about what he had observed. But 30 years of military experience had taught him that when every instinct screamed danger, it was usually right. He settled back into his corner, but his posture had changed. The slumped shoulders of defeat had been replaced by the alert stance of a soldier. For the first time in 3 years, General Marcus Thompson began to emerge from beneath the layers of despair and defeat that had buried him. The city rumbled above as another train approached the platform. Marcus knew that whatever was happening on that train, whatever those 3 men were planning, it was just the beginning. And despite everything he had lost, despite the years of being invisible and forgotten, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders once again. 20 minutes passed before Marcus heard the first sirens. The sound cut through the underground tunnel like a knife, growing louder as emergency vehicles gathered somewhere above. His worst fears were being confirmed with each wailing note that echoed through the subway system. Marcus pulled himself up using the metal railing, his body protesting the sudden movement. 3 years of sleeping on concrete had taken their toll, but adrenaline was now overriding the chronic pain in his joints. Other people on the platform looked around nervously as the sirens multiplied. But Marcus was already moving toward the station's communication board. The electronic display that usually showed train schedules was flashing red warnings. Service suspended. Emergency situation. All passengers evacuate immediately. Transit workers appeared from their stations, their faces grim as they began directing the few remaining passengers toward the exits. "Sir, you need to leave the platform immediately," a young transit officer said, approaching Marcus with the practiced authority of someone used to dealing with difficult situations. Marcus looked at the officer's name tag, Rodriguez. "Officer Rodriguez, what's the situation?" Rodriguez paused, surprised by the clarity and authority in the homeless man's voice. "There's been an incident on the red line, that's all I can tell you. Please move toward the exit." But Marcus wasn't moving toward the exit. His mind was processing information at a speed that surprised him. The red line was the train he had watched leave 20 minutes ago. The train with 3 suspicious men. The train carrying hundreds of innocent commuters, including people he had seen every day for 3 years. "How many casualties?" Marcus asked, his voice taking on the tone of someone accustomed to receiving critical information. Rodriguez stepped back, confused by the transformation in the man he had assumed was just another homeless person causing problems. "Sir, I really can't discuss operational details. You need to evacuate now." Marcus understood the officer's position, but he also understood something Rodriguez didn't. This wasn't a random incident or an accident. This was an attack carefully planned and executed. And if his assessment was correct, it wasn't over. He made his way toward the exit, but instead of leaving the station, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the emergency response. Years of military training had taught him that the first attack was often designed to draw emergency resources to one location, leaving other targets vulnerable. Through the station entrance, Marcus could see the organized chaos of an emergency response. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars lined the street. Officers were setting up barriers while paramedics prepared for casualties. The coordination was impressive, but Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The emergency responders were concentrating their efforts on the Red Line incident, exactly as any attackers would want. But Marcus had counted more than 3 suspicious individuals during his morning observations. The 3 on the train had been obvious once he knew what to look for, but there had been others, subtle signs he had noted subconsciously and was only now remembering clearly. A woman near the Blue Line platform had been checking her phone repeatedly, not in the casual way of someone reading messages, but with the precision of someone following a timeline. A man by the Green Line entrance had been photographing the station layout, not like a tourist, but like someone documenting security positions and exit routes. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. He might be homeless, forgotten, and dismissed by society, but he was still a Marine. And Marines didn't abandon civilians in danger. He approached Officer Rodriguez again, but this time his posture was different. Gone was the shuffling gait of a street person. Marcus stood straight, his shoulders back, his eyes focused with the intensity of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "Officer, my name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a retired Marine general, and I believe you're dealing with a coordinated terrorist attack." Rodriguez stared at him in disbelief. The transformation in the homeless man was so complete it seemed impossible. But something in Marcus's bearing, his tone, his direct eye contact, made the officer pause instead of dismissing him immediately. "Sir, with respect, that's not possible. Our intelligence indicates this was an isolated incident involving explosive devices on one train." "Your intelligence is wrong," Marcus said firmly. "I observed at least 6 individuals this morning displaying coordinated surveillance behavior. The Red Line attack was designed to draw your resources away from the real targets." As if summoned by his words, Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. "All units, we have reports of suspicious activity at Grand Central Blue Line platform. Repeat, possible secondary threat at Blue Line platform." Rodriguez's eyes widened as he looked at Marcus with new understanding. "How did you know?" 30 years of military service teaches you to recognize patterns," Marcus replied. "And right now, those patterns are telling me you have multiple teams positioning for simultaneous attacks on critical infrastructure." The radio erupted again. "Control, we need bomb squad at Green Line Central Hub. Suspicious package reported by maintenance staff." Marcus wasn't surprised. He had been watching the city's transportation system from his corner for 3 years, learning its rhythms, its vulnerabilities, its critical points. What he was seeing now was a sophisticated, multi-pronged attack designed to paralyze the entire subway system and maximize casualties. "Officer Rodriguez, you need to get me to your commanding officer immediately," Marcus said. "This attack is just beginning, and you're going to need every advantage you can get." Rodriguez hesitated for only a moment before speaking into his radio. "Control, I have a possible military consultant at my location, requesting immediate supervisor to platform entrance." While they waited, Marcus continued his assessment. The attackers had chosen their timing perfectly. Morning rush hour, when the trains were packed and emergency services would be stretched thin, responding to multiple simultaneous incidents. It was a textbook terrorist operation, designed to create maximum chaos and fear, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had operated in front of someone who had spent his entire adult life studying exactly these kinds of threats. Someone who had learned to see patterns and predict enemy movements. Someone who, despite 3 years of living invisible on the streets, still remembered how to fight. As sirens continued to wail above ground and emergency radio chatter filled the air, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: purpose. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had a mission that mattered. And despite everything he had lost, despite the long fall from respected general to forgotten homeless man, he was exactly where he needed to be. The battle for the city's subway system was just beginning, and General Marcus Thompson was ready to fight again. Captain Sarah Martinez arrived at the platform entrance within minutes, her face showing the strain of coordinating multiple emergency responses. She expected to find Officer Rodriguez dealing with a confused civilian, not the composed figure who stepped forward to meet her. "Captain Martinez," Marcus said, extending his hand with the confident bearing of an equal rather than a subordinate. "General Marcus Thompson, United States Marine Corps, retired. I believe I can assist with your current situation." Martinez paused, studying the man before her. Despite his homeless appearance, something in his posture and direct gaze made her take him seriously. "Sir, with respect, I need to see some identification." Marcus reached into his worn jacket and pulled out a military ID card he had managed to keep through 3 years on the streets. It was his last connection to who he had been, carefully protected in a waterproof pouch along with Sarah's wedding ring. Martinez examined the ID, her expression changing as she read the details. "General Thompson, I remember reading about your service record at the academy. You were the one who developed the urban counterterrorism protocols we still use today. Among other things," Marcus replied grimly, "and right now those protocols are exactly what you need. This isn't a random attack, Captain. You're dealing with a sophisticated operation designed to paralyze your emergency response and maximize civilian casualties." As if to emphasize his point, another burst of radio chatter interrupted them. "Control, We have confirmed explosive devices at 3 additional stations. Request immediate bomb squad deployment to Yellow Line, Purple Line, and Orange Line hubs. Martinez's face went pale. 5 stations simultaneously. We don't have enough bomb squads for this. 6 stations, Marcus corrected. They haven't hit the Silver Line yet because that's their escape route. Classic terrorist playbook. Create chaos everywhere except your predetermined exit path. He moved to a subway map mounted on the station wall, his finger tracing the interconnected lines with the precision of someone who had studied urban warfare extensively. They're targeting the central hub stations to create maximum disruption. Each explosion will shut down multiple lines, creating a cascade failure across the entire system. Martinez followed his analysis, seeing the pattern emerge. If they succeed in shutting down all these stations, tens of thousands of commuters will be trapped underground. Marcus finished. Emergency services won't be able to reach them effectively, and the attackers will have created the perfect environment for secondary attacks. The radio crackled again, with increasingly desperate updates. Reports of suspicious individuals at multiple stations, evacuation procedures beginning across the system, and the growing realization that they were dealing with something far larger than initially thought. General Thompson, Martinez said, the title coming naturally despite his appearance, what do you recommend? Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settling over him. 3 years of invisibility melted away as his military training took control. First, stop trying to respond to every threat simultaneously. You're spreading your resources too thin, exactly as they planned. Second, we need to identify their command structure and communication methods. He pointed to different areas on the map. These attacks are too coordinated to be operating independently. They have someone controlling the timing, probably from a central location with visual oversight of the entire system. How do we find them? Marcus smiled grimly. We use the one advantage they don't know we have. For 3 years I've been invisible in this subway system. I know every corner, every maintenance area, every place someone could position themselves for surveillance. And more importantly, I know how to move through this system without being detected. Martinez stared at him, beginning to understand. You want to conduct reconnaissance while they're focused on the emergency response. More than reconnaissance, Marcus replied. I want to take out their command structure and disrupt their communications. But first we need to evacuate the civilians in a way that doesn't trigger their backup plans. Another explosion rumbled through the tunnels, closer this time. Emergency lights flickered, and the sound of panicked voices echoed from deeper in the station. The attack was escalating exactly as Marcus had predicted. Captain, how many plainclothes officers do you have available for immediate deployment? Marcus asked, his mind already formulating a counterattack plan. Maybe a dozen across all the affected stations. Not enough for a direct confrontation, but sufficient for what I have in mind. Marcus turned to face her fully, and Martinez saw something in his eyes that reminded her why this man had once commanded thousands of Marines. I need complete tactical authority over the underground response. Your bomb squads and uniform officers handle the explosive devices. I'll handle the terrorists. Martinez hesitated. Protocol dictated that she couldn't hand over operational control to a civilian, regardless of his former rank. But protocol hadn't anticipated a coordinated terrorist attack on this scale, and the homeless man standing before her clearly understood the situation better than anyone else available. General, I can give you advisory authority and full cooperation, but I can't officially put you in command. Understood, Marcus replied. But Captain, when this is over, there's going to be an investigation. Make sure the record shows that every recommendation I made was implemented as a suggestion, not an order. She nodded, grateful for his understanding of her position. What do you need? Marcus studied the subway map again, his finger tracing potential movement patterns. First, I need access to the maintenance tunnels and service areas. Second, I need real-time communication with your dispatch. Third, I need someone to create a diversion that will draw their attention away from their primary objectives. What kind of diversion? Tell the media that you've identified and captured the leader of the terrorist cell. Make it public, make it loud, and make them believe their operation has been compromised. Martinez understood immediately. Force them to accelerate their timeline and make mistakes. Exactly. Desperate terrorists make tactical errors, and when they do, we'll be waiting for them. As another explosion echoed through the subway system, Marcus began moving toward the maintenance access he had used as shelter during particularly cold nights. 3 years of invisibility had taught him every hidden passage, every forgotten corner, every way to move unseen through the underground maze. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt truly alive. The homeless man who had been dismissed and ignored was about to remind the world that a Marine never truly retires. The battle for the city's heart was about to begin, and General Marcus Thompson was going to war one more time. Marcus disappeared into the maintenance tunnels with the silent efficiency of a ghost. 3 years of living in these forgotten spaces had given him an advantage no terrorist could have anticipated. He knew every pipe, every electrical conduit, every shortcut between stations that even the transit workers had forgotten existed. The service tunnels were darker than the main platforms, lit only by occasional emergency lighting that cast long shadows perfect for concealment. Marcus moved through them with the confidence of someone who had navigated far more dangerous terrain in Afghanistan and Iraq. The musty air and cramped spaces that might claustrophobe others felt like home to him now. Through his earpiece, provided hastily by Captain Martinez, Marcus could hear the coordinated chaos above. Bomb squad to red line, device neutralized. But we have casualties. Green line evacuation in progress, estimate 400 civilians still below ground. Unknown. Suspects spotted at Blue Line Junction. Armed and dangerous. Marcus paused at a maintenance ladder that led to an observation point he had discovered months ago. From here, he could see into the Blue Line Junction without being detected. Climbing carefully, he positioned himself behind a grate that offered perfect surveillance of the platform below. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. 3 armed individuals in civilian clothes were positioned strategically around the platform. Not like random attackers, but like professional soldiers. They moved with military precision, communicated through subtle hand signals, and had positioned themselves to control all exit points from the station. But Marcus also saw something else. These weren't the same individuals he had observed that morning. This was a second team, which meant the operation was even larger than he had initially assessed. His mind quickly calculated the implications. If there were secondary teams at each station, the total number of attackers could be 20 or more. "Control, this is Thompson," he whispered into his earpiece. "Blue Line Junction has 3 armed suspects, military-trained, controlling civilian evacuation routes. This is not the primary team from this morning's observations." Captain Martinez's voice crackled back. "Understood, General. What's your assessment?" "We're dealing with at least 2 waves of attackers. The explosive devices were Wave 1, designed to create chaos and draw emergency response. These armed teams are Wave 2, positioned to control the evacuation routes and maximize casualties." Marcus studied the terrorists' positioning more carefully. They were professional, but they had made one crucial error. They were focused outward, watching for threats from the main tunnels and emergency responders. They weren't expecting surveillance from the maintenance areas above. "Control, I need you to create that media diversion now," Marcus said. "Tell them you've captured the cell leader and that the operation has been compromised. I need these teams to break protocol and reveal their communication methods." Within minutes, Marcus could hear the emergency broadcast echoing through the station's public address system. "Attention, the terrorist threat has been neutralized. The suspect leader has been apprehended. All remaining suspects should surrender immediately." The reaction below was immediate and exactly what Marcus had hoped for. All 3 terrorists simultaneously reached for communication devices, not phones but military-grade radio equipment. More importantly, they looked toward the same location when receiving their new orders. Marcus followed their gaze to a maintenance room he had used as shelter during his first winter on the streets. Someone was using that room as a command post, coordinating the entire operation. The irony wasn't lost on him. His former sleeping quarters had become terrorist headquarters. "Control, I've located their command post," Marcus whispered. "Maintenance room C7, Blue Line Junction. Single entry point, probably 1 or 2 individuals coordinating the entire operation. We can send a tactical team." "Negative," Marcus interrupted. "A tactical team will be detected long before they reach the position. I'm going in alone." "General, with respect, you're not equipped for armed confrontation." Marcus smiled grimly in the darkness. "Captain, I spent 3 years learning every inch of these tunnels. I know exactly where the emergency equipment is stored, including tools that can be very effective weapons in the right hands. He began moving through the maintenance corridors toward a utility station he had discovered during his second year living underground. The transit authority stored emergency equipment throughout the system: crowbars, bolt cutters, emergency hammers, and industrial flashlights that could serve multiple purposes. Marcus equipped himself methodically, testing the weight and balance of each tool like a warrior preparing for battle. The crowbar felt solid in his hands, its weight familiar from his construction work during his brief attempt at civilian employment. The heavy flashlight would serve as both illumination and weapon if necessary. Moving toward maintenance room, C7 required passing through a section of tunnel that connected to the old pneumatic postal system, abandoned decades ago but still accessible to someone who knew the right passages. Marcus had discovered this route during a particularly cold night, when he needed shelter from police sweeps of the main platforms. As he approached the command post, Marcus could hear voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize, but the tone was urgent. The media diversion was working. They were recalculating their timeline and adjusting their strategy, which meant they were also vulnerable to disruption. Marcus positioned himself outside the maintenance room's single entrance, listening carefully to determine how many people were inside. Two voices, definitely male, speaking rapidly about secondary targets and extraction protocols. They were discussing something about the silver line. His prediction about their escape route was proving correct. Through a crack in the door, Marcus could see sophisticated communication equipment, multiple monitors showing security feeds from various stations, and detailed maps of the subway system marked with positions and timing notations. This was definitely the nerve center of the entire operation, but he also saw something that made his blood run cold. On one of the monitors was a live feed from a station he recognized, the platform where Mrs. Chen caught her daily train to visit her grandson. The station was full of evacuating civilians, and according to the terrorists' timeline visible on their planning board, it was the next target. Marcus checked his watch. According to their schedule, the attack on Mrs. Chen's station would begin in 8 minutes. There wasn't time for a careful, methodical approach. Sometimes the best strategy was the direct one. Taking a deep breath and drawing on 30 years of combat experience, Marcus prepared to remind two terrorists why Marines were considered the finest warriors in the world. The homeless man they might glimpse would be the last thing they ever underestimated. Marcus burst through the maintenance room door with the explosive force of 3 decades of military training unleashed in a single moment. The two terrorists, focused intently on their monitors and communication equipment, had less than a second to register the threat before the general was among them. The first terrorist reached for his weapon, but Marcus's crowbar caught his wrist with bone-crushing force. The gun clattered across the concrete floor as the man screamed in pain. The second terrorist managed to clear his holster, but found himself staring into the blinding beam of Marcus's industrial flashlight before a precise strike to his temple dropped him unconscious. "Control, this is Thompson," Marcus said into his earpiece while zip-tying the conscious terrorist with electrical cable from the maintenance supplies. "Command post secured. 2 suspects neutralized. I have intelligence on remaining attack timeline." Captain Martinez's voice crackled back with barely contained amazement. "General, confirm status. Are you injured?" "Negative, but we have immediate priority targets." Marcus studied the monitors and planning boards, his trained mind quickly processing the terrorists' complete operational plan. "They have teams positioned at 7 stations total. Next target is Silver Line Station 15 in 6 minutes. Evacuation site for families with children." The implications hit him like a physical blow. They had specifically targeted a station used primarily by families, knowing that the evacuation protocols would direct civilians with children to that location. It was a level of calculated evil that made Marcus's blood burn with righteous fury. "Control, you need to divert all civilians away from Silver Line Station 15 immediately. And I need tactical teams at the following locations." Marcus read off the list of stations marked on the terrorists' planning board, along with the timing for each attack. While coordinating with Captain Martinez, Marcus examined the communication equipment the terrorists had been using. Military-grade radios, encrypted channels, and most importantly, a master control unit that could send abort signals to all teams simultaneously. "General Thompson," came Martinez's voice, "we're having trouble reaching the tactical teams at some locations. The terrorists are jamming police frequencies in their operational areas." Marcus smiled grimly as he studied the communication setup. Not anymore, they're not. He began systematically destroying the jamming equipment and reconfiguring the radios to police frequencies. Years of working with military communications had taught him exactly how to turn enemy equipment into friendly assets. But as Marcus worked, he noticed something on one of the monitors that made his heart stop. A live feed showed Mrs. Chen standing on the platform at Silverline Station 15, apparently caught in the evacuation crowd flowing toward what the terrorists intended as a killing ground. Control, we have a problem. Civilians are still entering the target station. The evacuation flow is actually concentrating people in the danger zone. We're trying to redirect them, but the platform is already overcrowded. Emergency services can't get close enough to establish proper crowd control. Marcus looked at the terrorist planning board again, noting the precise timing of their attack. 3 minutes until the planted explosive devices would detonate, followed by armed teams moving in to attack evacuating civilians. It was a nightmare scenario designed to maximize casualties and media impact. Captain, I'm going to Silverline Station 15, Marcus announced, already moving toward the maintenance tunnel access. General, negative. We need you to continue providing intelligence coordination from your current position. The intelligence is complete, Marcus replied, transmitting photos of the planning boards with his phone. But those people are about to die unless someone who understands the attack pattern gets there in person. Marcus was already moving through the maintenance tunnels at a pace that would have been impossible for someone who hadn't spent 3 years learning every shortcut in the system. He could reach Silverline Station 15 through the old postal pneumatic tunnels faster than any emergency responder could navigate the crowded streets above. As he ran through the narrow passages, Marcus's mind calculated the tactical situation. The terrorists would have positioned their explosive devices at structural points designed to maximize casualties and prevent escape. Their armed teams would be waiting at concealed positions to attack survivors attempting to evacuate. But they had planned their attack assuming normal emergency response procedures and panicked civilian behavior. They hadn't planned for someone who understood both their strategy and the underground environment better than they did. Marcus emerged from a maintenance access directly onto the Silverline platform, his sudden appearance causing several civilians to gasp in surprise. To them, he still looked like the homeless man they might have passed countless times, but his bearing and purposeful movement made it clear something had changed. Everyone listen to me, Marcus called out in the command voice that had once directed thousands of Marines. You need to move away from the platform edge immediately. Get against the far wall and stay low. Some people began to move, responding instinctively to the authority in his voice. But others hesitated, unsure whether to trust the homeless man who had suddenly appeared among them. Mrs. Chen recognized him immediately. Marcus, what's happening? Mrs. Chen, I need you to help me get these people organized. There are explosive devices on this platform and we have less than 2 minutes to minimize casualties. Her eyes widened, but she didn't question him. Something in his voice, his posture, his complete transformation from the defeated man she had shown kindness to, convinced her that he knew exactly what he was talking about. Everyone, Mrs. Chen called out in a voice surprisingly strong for her small frame. This man is a military general. You need to do exactly what he says right now. The effect was immediate. People began moving away from the platform edge, parents grabbing children, everyone pressing against the far wall as Marcus had directed. But Marcus was already moving, his trained eyes scanning for the placement of explosive devices based on the patterns he had seen in the terrorists' planning materials. He found the first device tucked beneath a bench, exactly where maximum structural damage would occur. Military training and 3 years of urban survival had taught him enough about explosive devices to know he couldn't disarm it safely, but he could minimize its impact. Control, this is Thompson. I need you to shut down all electrical power to Silverline Station 15 immediately. All power, including emergency lighting. General, that will trap civilians in complete darkness. Better than trap them with flying metal fragments, Marcus replied grimly, continuing to search for additional devices. The explosive devices are positioned to maximize damage from electrical fires and structural collapse. Remove the electrical component, and we reduce casualties by at least 60%. As the lights went out, plunging the platform into darkness broken only by cell phone lights and emergency chemical illumination, Marcus heard the sound that confirmed his worst fears. Footsteps in the tunnels, moving with military precision toward positions around the platform. The armed teams were moving into position for the second phase of the attack, and Marcus was the only thing standing between them and several hundred innocent civilians trapped in the dark. The first explosion rocked the platform with devastating force, but Marcus's tactical adjustments had saved hundreds of lives. Instead of the catastrophic structural collapse the terrorists had planned, the blast created manageable debris and limited electrical fires. The civilians huddled against the far wall were shaken but largely unharmed. In the darkness that followed, Marcus could hear the approaching footsteps of the armed assault teams. 3 years of living in these tunnels had given him perfect familiarity with every sound, every echo, every acoustic signature. 4 individuals moving from the north tunnel, 3 from the south, all carrying equipment that clinked softly with each step. "Control. This is Thompson," Marcus whispered into his earpiece. 7 armed suspects approaching civilian position. "I'm going to create a diversion to draw them away from the crowd. General, wait for tactical backup. ETA is 4 minutes. These people don't have 4 minutes, Marcus replied, checking his improvised weapons, the crowbar, industrial flashlight, and several tools he had gathered from emergency supply boxes throughout the tunnels. Marcus moved away from the civilian group, using his intimate knowledge of the platform layout to position himself between the approaching terrorists and the huddled families. In the darkness, his homeless appearance would actually work in his favor. To the attackers, he would appear to be just another panicked civilian. The first terrorist emerged from the north tunnel, sweeping the area with a tactical flashlight attached to his assault rifle. Marcus waited until the beam passed over him, then moved with the silent precision of a predator. His military training had included extensive hand-to-hand combat, skills that 3 years of street survival had kept sharp through necessity. The terrorist never saw him coming. Marcus's crowbar struck the rifle, sending it clattering across the platform while his follow-up strike dropped the attacker unconscious. 1 down, 6 to go. But the sound of the falling weapon alerted the other attackers. Shouts in a foreign language echoed through the tunnel as they began coordinating their search for the threat that had eliminated their teammate. Unknown assailant on platform, came a heavily accented voice speaking English. Switch to thermal imaging. Eliminate all targets. Marcus realized with growing dread that the terrorists had night vision and thermal equipment, advantages that neutralized his knowledge of the platform layout. Worse, their new orders indicated they were abandoning any pretense of discriminating between combatants and civilians. Control, terrorist teams have thermal imaging and are now targeting all civilians, Marcus reported. I need emergency lighting restored immediately. Darkness is no longer an advantage. Restoring power in 30 seconds, came Martinez's reply. Marcus used those 30 seconds to position himself near the platform's emergency supply station. When the lights flickered back to life, he was ready with industrial-grade tools and a plan that would have seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't spent 30 years learning to turn any environment into a battlefield. The restored lighting revealed a scene of controlled chaos. Civilians pressed against the far wall, debris from the explosion scattered across the platform, and 6 heavily armed terrorists positioned around the station's perimeter. They moved with professional efficiency, but Marcus could see tactical errors born of overconfidence. They had positioned themselves assuming they were hunting frightened civilians, not engaging a military professional who understood their training and tactics better than they understood his capabilities. Marcus emerged from behind the emergency station with the bearing of the general he had never stopped being. Gone was any pretense of being a helpless homeless man. The terrorists found themselves facing 30 years of Marine combat experience unleashed with righteous fury. United States Marine Corps, Marcus bellowed with the command voice that had once called troops to battle. Surrender your weapons immediately! The terrorists' response was immediate and deadly. Automatic weapons fire that would have shredded any normal opponent. But Marcus was already moving, using debris and platform infrastructure as cover, while advancing on their positions with tactics learned in urban warfare environments far more dangerous than a subway platform. His industrial flashlight, thrown with precision, shattered the night vision equipment of the nearest terrorist. His crowbar, used as both weapon and tool, disabled the weapon of a second attacker while providing leverage to reach a third position. Marcus fought with the calculated fury of someone defending not just innocent civilians, But the memory of every soldier he had ever commanded, every value he had sworn to protect, and the honor of the uniform he no longer wore but had never truly removed. The sound of approaching sirens indicated that tactical backup was finally arriving. But Marcus couldn't wait for support. Mrs. Chen and hundreds of other innocent people were depending on him to hold the line against an enemy that had declared war on everything he held sacred. One terrorist managed to get behind cover and began laying down suppressing fire toward the civilian group. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that this was the moment when theory became reality, when all his training and experience crystallized into the simple imperative that had defined his entire adult life: protect those who cannot protect themselves. Marcus charged directly into the gunfire, using a combination of military tactics and desperate innovation that would have impressed his former drill instructors. The terrorist's weapon jammed at the crucial moment, perhaps due to debris from the explosion, perhaps due to the kind of luck that sometimes favors those fighting for righteous causes. The final confrontation was brief and decisive. Marcus's years of combat experience against a terrorist who had trained for mass casualties but never faced a professional soldier in close combat. When the tactical teams finally breached the platform, they found 6 unconscious terrorists secured with electrical cable and one very calm Marine general sitting beside Mrs. Chen, asking about her grandson. "General Thompson," Captain Martinez called out as she approached with her tactical team. "Status report." Marcus looked up from where he was helping Mrs. Chen treat a minor cut on her hand. "Platform secured, Captain. 7 enemy combatants neutralized. Minimal civilian casualties, explosive devices contained. I recommend immediate medical evaluation for everyone here. But the immediate threat has been eliminated." As paramedics began checking civilians and processing the captured terrorists, Mrs. Chen looked at Marcus with new understanding. "You really are a general, aren't you?" Marcus managed a tired smile. "Yes, ma'am. And you really did save my life by bringing me coffee all those mornings. Gave me something to fight for when I thought I had nothing left." Around them, the subway platform buzzed with emergency activity as the city began the process of recovery. But for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Thompson felt like he had come home. 6 months after the subway attack, Marcus Thompson stood before a mirror in his new apartment, adjusting the dress blue uniform he hadn't worn in 3 years. The reflection looking back at him bore little resemblance to the homeless man who had once sat invisibly on subway platforms. Clean-shaven, well-fed, and bearing the confident posture of a man who had rediscovered his purpose, Marcus was preparing for a ceremony he never expected to attend. The Congressional Medal of Honor ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. But Marcus's morning began with a familiar routine, a visit to the subway platform where his transformation had begun. The corner where he had spent 3 years observing the world now held a small memorial plaque recognizing the victims of the terrorist attack and the emergency responders who had saved hundreds of lives. Mrs. Chen was waiting for him at the platform, as she had been every morning for the past month. Their friendship had deepened into something like family, with Marcus becoming the grandfather figure her grandson had never known and Mrs. Chen becoming the anchor that kept him connected to the civilian world he was relearning to navigate. "You look very handsome in your uniform," she said, straightening an imaginary wrinkle on his jacket with the care of someone who understood the significance of the moment. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, and thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." She smiled, but Marcus could see the concern in her eyes. "Are you ready for all the attention today? The reporters, the crowds, the ceremony?" Marcus considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of debriefings, interviews, job offers, and public recognition that felt overwhelming after years of invisibility. The Department of Homeland Security had offered him a position developing urban counterterrorism protocols. 3 universities wanted him to head their security studies programs. Publishers were competing to help him write his story. "I'm ready," he said finally, "but not for the reasons people think." The subway platform had taught Marcus that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about seeing what others missed, acting when others hesitated, and protecting those who needed protection, regardless of whether anyone would ever know or care. Captain Martinez appeared at the platform entrance. Now Deputy Chief Martinez, following her promotion for her handling of the crisis. She had become both a professional colleague and a friend, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with life or death decision-making. "General, your car is ready," she said. "The ceremony starts in 2 hours and the president is looking forward to meeting you." Marcus nodded, but his attention was drawn to a figure in the corner of the platform. A young veteran, probably in his 20s, holding a cardboard sign and wearing the same defeated expression Marcus remembered from his own early days on the streets. "Give me a moment," Marcus said to Martinez, then walked over to the young man. "What's your name, son?" The veteran looked up, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're the general from the news. The one who stopped the terrorists. I'm Marcus Thompson. And you are?" "Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez, Army. Was Army." The young man's voice carried the same hopelessness Marcus remembered feeling after Sarah's death. Marcus sat down beside him on the concrete, not caring about his dress uniform. "Tell me what happened." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus listened to a story that could have been his own. Combat tours, injuries, medical bills, unemployment, depression, and the slow slide from respected soldier to invisible homeless person. It was a story repeated thousands of times across the country. A story that Marcus now understood he had a responsibility to address. "David," Marcus said finally, "I want you to come with me today. Not to the ceremony, that's just politics and cameras. But afterward, I want to show you something that might change your perspective on what's possible." The Congressional Medal of Honor ceremony was everything Marcus had expected. Formal, impressive, and focused on the dramatic moment when he had faced down armed terrorists in the subway. The president spoke about courage and heroism. The media captured every moment, and the assembled dignitaries applauded at all the appropriate times. But Marcus's mind was on David Rodriguez, who was waiting outside the Capitol building with Mrs. Chen, probably wondering why a famous general had bothered to notice him. After the ceremony, Marcus did something that surprised everyone present. Instead of attending the reception in his honor, he walked outside and approached the group of reporters covering the event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority that made people stop and listen, "I have something to say about the real meaning of today." The cameras focused on him as he gestured for David to join him. "This is Staff Sergeant David Rodriguez, United States Army. 6 months ago, he was where I was 3 years ago. Homeless, forgotten, and invisible to a society that had benefited from his service, but failed to support him when he needed help." Marcus put his hand on David's shoulder. The terrorist attack 6 months ago wasn't stopped by one person. It was stopped by someone who had learned to see what others missed because 3 years of homelessness had taught him to observe his environment differently. It was stopped by the kindness of people like Mrs. Chen, who treated a homeless veteran like a human being worth caring about. He looked directly into the cameras. "Today, I'm announcing the formation of the Invisible Warriors Foundation, dedicated to ensuring that no veteran ever becomes invisible again. Because the next time our country faces a crisis, the person who saves us might be sitting on a street corner, holding a cardboard sign, waiting for someone to remember that they're still one of us." 3 years later, Marcus Thompson's foundation had helped over 2,000 homeless veterans find housing, employment, and purpose. David Rodriguez had become the foundation's first program coordinator, using his own experience to reach veterans that traditional programs couldn't help. Marcus still visited the subway platform regularly, not as a homeless man seeking charity, but as someone who understood that the most important battles were often fought by people nobody bothered to see. The plaque commemorating the attack had been joined by another one, a simple brass marker reading, "General Marcus Thompson Memorial Platform, dedicated to those who serve in the shadows." But Marcus was most proud of a smaller memorial, one that only a few people knew about. In the maintenance room where he had defeated the terrorist command post, he had placed a photograph of Sarah, along with a note that read, "For Sarah, who taught me that losing everything doesn't mean losing the ability to save someone else." Mrs. Chen still brought him coffee every morning, though now they met in his office rather than on a platform corner. And sometimes, when the weight of public responsibility felt overwhelming, Marcus would walk through the maintenance tunnels he had once called home, remembering that heroism wasn't about being seen or celebrated. It was about being ready when someone needed you, regardless of whether anyone would ever know your name. In the end, the homeless man nobody noticed had saved not just a subway system, but had reminded an entire country that heroes come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes they're wearing uniforms and medals. Sometimes they're wearing rags and carrying cardboard signs. Sometimes they're the same person, just at different points in their journey.